First of all, we have the long-term causes. We're going to have the isms. The first one is imperialism, where we just had our section on imperialism. Britain, France, now Germany's getting involved. These countries that want to take over other areas. They want to control them economically. So that's one of the causes that we have. Are they kind of jockeying for power for each other for where they want to take over? Those of you that took AP World History, one of the most classic essays in AP World History is The Race for Africa at the end of the 1800s. Okay, well, that's still going on. All right, nationalism. What is nationalism?
Pride for your country.
Yeah, pride for your country. It's basically patriotism, but what's the difference between patriotism and nationalism?
Forcing your patriotism on others.
And that's kind of there. There's no fine line. It kind of just blends over there. And also you might, when we go look at World War II for nationalism, where your country can do no wrong. All right, can you be patriotic and still criticize your country? Yeah, that's one thing that kind of we're America. We're kind of in a hard stance right now when we look at things on there. Are we becoming more nationalistic or patriot when it comes to that? And it's where at what time the line goes. Militarism. Guess what this deals with?
Military.
Now, how would that be a cause to a war?
Because you'd be taking back in war. You're trying to get a stronger military.
If you keep building up an army, a navy, and building up and building up. Do generals like to play with their toys?
Yeah.
All right. There's only so much. Those of you that play sports, I mean, I know one thing. Devin, when you were starting basketball season this year, I mean, you had 3 weeks or 2 weeks of practice before you. Didn't you get tired of just playing against each other? And you're just ready to play against somebody else. All right, Coach, we ran this play 80 times today. All right, let's see if it works actually against somebody else. And so you want to get, well, military, you play war games, you do different things, but we really think we are better than someone else. And you combine that with these other things together, that's good. And then we have the big one that's not an ism, the entangling alliances. Not just alliances, but entangling. What does it mean by entangling?
Yeah, like you're in alliance with like one country and like against each other.
Yeah, this is where, and when we play the World War I game, we will end up, I mean, I cannot predict what the alliances will end up being between you all, but we will end up with some entangling alliances somewhere. And you will see it happen as I go through with these webs. We're going to end up with 2 or 3 different groups, but then they're going to start crossing some of them. And somewhere something's going to happen. All right, now, you kind of look at here, and this is where you kind of see where we ended up with 2 major groups. And we'll actually end up with, if you follow your rules, we'll end up with some of these same things in the World War I game that we play. In there, except for we'll have more of the smaller countries in there also. Now, the immediate cause was the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand. What happened? That little country, Serbia, that I was mentioning. In Serbia, the Archduke, which an Archduke is kind of like a prince. But when Prince Francis Ferdinand was in Serbia, the Black Hand, which was a terrorist group, for all intents and purposes, they killed him. Now, if you are when this is when Austria-Hungary were together as one country, if someone killed a prince from your country, or the Archduke, and it's a little country by you want to go take care of the problem? And so this is kind of like the spark that got it. So, I'm not going to go through the whole list of what happened with this, but Austria-Hungary attacked Serbia. Serbia has an alliance with Russia. Russia comes to protect Serbia. But they're fighting Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary has an alliance against Germany. So Germany is now going to attack Russia. Russia has an alliance that if Germany is ever to attack them, that France will be on their side. So now France is attacking Germany. And Britain is in alliance there with France, so they're also involved with this. And that's just the first layer of these alliances.
How's America involved?
Well, we didn't. We stayed out for the longest time. We'll get to that. We stay out of it. All right, here are the two sides, the Central Powers. And I'm not going through all the small countries in it. And this is where a lot of this is, again, stuff that you should have had in world history. Some of you have not had any of this. Some of you look at this and say, wow, that word looks familiar from somewhere. Mr. Ruda must have made us read it one time, and he must have said something. Mr. Wyko. But the three main countries, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire.
That was like, I remember that.
All right, it is Turkey plus even more. If you took AP World History, then you really learned a lot about the Islamic empires that we had in the 16th, 17th, and 1800s. Well, it got smaller. It's kind of what's left. Now, the Ottoman Empire is one of those that they are still sort of powerful, but they're waning in their power. So they want to be relevant again. So that's what they're involved with, Central Powers. Now, the Allied powers, the three main countries with that are Britain, France, and Russia.
Do we join, we join Allied, right?
We will end up joining the Allies eventually, not at the beginning of the war.
Allied with Russia?
Well, no, we won't. And that is actually a key thing. We won't, well, we will with Russia, but we won't with the Soviet Union, which is where it gets tricky. Now, I mentioned about these alliances. Any reason why France and Russia would have an alliance that if either one of them was attacked by Germany, they both would?
Germany's in the middle.
Yeah, Germany is in the middle. So they're thinking, Germany knew about that alliance. That wasn't a secret alliance. So some of these alliances were secret. They knew, okay, if we're fighting one, we're going to have to fight both. And it's part of what you do for a defense. They were going to have to literally fight two wars. Yeah.
How did Germany become power?
What ultimately happened with Germany in the late 1800s, and this is what world history is, both Italy and Germany during the 1800s would have a lot of these kingdoms start joining together. If you remember in the Revolutionary War, we had the Hessians, right? Because there was basically the area of Hesse, which was its own sort of country at that time. But as all these little kingdoms joined together, that ultimately would make was originally we would have the Holy Roman Empire where they were loosely together, but they would ultimately come together. Actually, with World War II, this is where Otto von Bismarck would bring them really to their power at that time. Italy was the same thing, except for Italy was not nearly as powerful and rich as what was Germany was. Germany has a lot more things economically to help them than Italy does. It's hard for us to think of it because we normally think of Italy as a rich country. They were an extremely poor country. That's why we had so many immigrants coming from Italy as those birds of passages to work in America and send just a little bit of money back home to their family back in villages in Italy. All right, officially we were neutral, but we had more economic ties to Britain and France. So we're neutral, but who are we trading with? Britain and France. Now, for Inverness, World War II was bad. What was our main product in Citrus County? Phosphate. And guess who one of the biggest customers was that our phosphate here in Citrus County went to? It went to Germany. And guess what happens when World War I starts? Does the phosphate from Citrus County make it to Germany?
No.
And this is where we would end up with our phosphate mines and Floral City, Dunell, and things like that closing down. And then after the war, they did not pick back up because when they started to do the phosphate, then they moved further south down to the Lakeland, Polk County, Hillsborough County area there where they made the big phosphate mines there. And for several decades then, the population was actually a lot lower in Citrus County during the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. It would not be until the 1960s that the population would start going back up. And it would take a long time. Floral City still doesn't have as many people as what they had 100 years ago.
Dang.
All right, Wilson in 1916. His election slogan was, "He kept us out of the war."
Who's he? Are you talking about Wilson?
Yeah, Woodrow Wilson. When he ran for re-election, his slogan was, "He kept us out of the war." Remember, he was elected in 1912. The war in Europe starts in 1914. So they're fighting for 2 years. We're not involved. Do you notice that his his slogan is, he kept us out of the war, not he's going to keep us out of the war.
True.
Because guess what we do in 1917? Yeah, we end up joining in, and we are. Yeah.
Who in America didn't want us to join the war? Just everybody in
All right.
general, or?
And that is a good question. There are different groups. Now, some people said, should we get involved in something going on in Europe? No. So they aren't. And one of the questions I know is coming up in your notes in here, there are some immigrant groups that wouldn't want us to be involved. If you were German in ancestry, do you want the United States to go to war
With Germany.
with Germany? No, you still have family. Now, what about the Irish? The Irish want us going to war on the side of Britain.
No, because they hate Britain.
Yeah, they hate the British, so they don't want anything to help Britain. So the Irish were against the war. If you were Italian, do you want us to go to war and fight Italy when in the beginning of the war they are with the Central Powers?
No.
So we have those immigrant groups that are in it. So you kind of combine it. Plus, had Germany, Austria, Hungary, or any of those places done anything to us?
No.
No. So why the heck should we join? And that's part of the reason. Should we get involved? All right, we're listening to George Washington. All right, stay neutral. Don't get involved. So that's what we are doing at that point. We do have, and our biggest friend is Britain, we have all kinds of propaganda. And get used to that word for World War I, because this is when propaganda would come in there. And we're going to see different posters. And this is where I'm going to have, later on, a section with a whole bunch of different propaganda posters when we would join the war. But they are making the Germans as if, they call them Huns, okay? Because you think of Attila the Huns, and you think of barbarians. All right, don't call them Germans, you call them Huns. But they're going in. We would tell about how they're going into Belgium, and the poor Belgian women that are getting raped by the German soldiers as they're attacking. So these stories were coming into the United States, and that is kind of helping for the media. I say the German and Irish Americans did not want to be involved. Why?
Back home.
Yeah, back home. And then the Irish, again, they just didn't like the British, so they didn't want to get involved. And realize, America, we had a bunch of different ethnic groups there. So these groups, you usually want to fight a war with pretty much everybody supporting it. So, and we're going to find history repeats itself. Did we get involved in World War II in the beginning?
No.
No. It's not until Pearl Harbor. So, now, do we have a Pearl Harbor that gets us involved in World War I?
Nope.
No, we won't have
Why
that.
would Japan bomb, were they just trying to take us over?
We'll go into that with World War II then. So, all right, so for World War I, why would we join? I am going to keep this really simple. I know you want to have a really complex version. Okay, read in your Brinkley book, then the section on World War I, and then you can get even deeper than this. But here's the quick thing. Reason number one, basically if you put it down, I can get it down to three major reasons why we join it. The Lusitania. It was a passenger liner that was sunk by a German U-boat. What is a U-boat?
Submarine.
An underwater or undersea boat, which is a submarine. The Germans had basically perfected the first really successful submarines. Yes, I know the Confederate States of America had the first one that launched against a ship. Ben Franklin actually had designed one earlier, but mass-produced. The Germans in World War I had come out with these U-boats where they truly were something. Now, the Germans said they sunk this British liner. Think of it almost like a cruise liner at that time when people were crossing it. They said that it was carrying munitions, carrying ammunition and things to make weapons. The British said it didn't. We know today that, yes, it was. So the Germans were actually correct with their intelligence. Now, even with this by itself, and what was it, say 128 Americans were killed with it. A lot of Americans said, wait a minute, why, we don't need to go to war about this. If you are on a ship and it's going into an area that's fighting a war, do you have a chance that you might get caught in the crossfire?
Yeah.
Especially if the ship you're on is not selling your nation's flag, but one of the flags of the nation that is fighting in this war. So that's where for a lot of Americans they said, well, that's something. But reason number two that we would have, the Zimmerman note. This was a telegram that was intercepted by British intelligence. And in this telegram, Germany supposedly had made a deal with Mexico. If the United States joins in this war, if you attack the United States, after we win this war, we will give you back the land that you lost in the Mexican War.
Yeah.
Now, just remember, right before this time period, in less than 10 years before this, we had sent our army down to Veracruz. We had the problems with Pancha Villa. So Mexico and us weren't on the best relation anyways. So for Germany, they saw this was a chance. There's a lot of things. Was this really true? Did the British make up this? And they're with the Zimmerman note. But they're trying to get Mexico. Do we like anybody kind of persuade our little brother to do anything against us?
I thought they weren't allowed to do anything on this side of the world, the Western Hemisphere.
We said that. Do they have to? Do they have to listen to our orders?
Oh, all right.
Okay. Yes. There. All right. So there's two reasons. Now comes reason number 3. Right from a quote from a speech by President Wilson, to make the world safe for democracy. He was arguing that we need to get involved because we can have places that are going to go and be democratic nations, much like how the United States is. They are going to copy our example and become free.
Who said
What
that?
nation had just done a revolution to become a democratic country? Not Cuba. Russia. And here's where I'm going to have the real quick the world history review for you. But Russia had their White Revolution. They got rid of the Tsar. See, in the beginning we couldn't get with Russia, not because of communists, but because they had a Tsar. What is a Tsar?
Monarch.
It's a monarch. Do we want to align ourselves with someone that had a king?
No.
That's in power. And so no. But then when they overthrow Tsar Nicholas and they become a democracy like us, well, can we be friends with them now? So we joined at that time. There. Yes.
Who said make
Wilson.
World Wilson?
Yeah, Wilson. Now, here's our Russian history for American history, all right, or your world history. In March of 1917, Tsar Nicholas II is overthrown. A democratic government is formed. That is the White Revolution. 1 month later is when we would declare war. So you combined in the Lusitania, where people are upset about that. Some people are upset about the Zimmerman note. Now we have a moral reason to get in and fight for this war. Because Russia is in our example, we can side with Russia. So we declare war on Germany. But before the year is over, we will have what is called the Red Revolution, as Lenin and the Bolsheviks would overthrow that democratic government and then form the communist nation, which is from then on known as the Soviet Union. So we're now allied with a communist nation. But we're not allied for very long because Lenin and the Soviet Union, they get out of the war. Anyone know why the Russians wanted out of this war?
So they could pick up all the pieces.
No, Germany did. Germany was kicking their butt. Germany was a modern industrialized country. Russia, and if you happen to get Russia in the World War I game, they have the biggest army. But they're not very good industrially.
Oh, true.
Where the Germans will end up having these modern mechanized weapons and machine guns, the Russians, well, they don't have enough guns for everybody, and some of the guns they're giving you might have been something that your great-grandfather would have used in a war also. So here you go, you get something that's kind of about the age of the Civil War gun against someone with a machine gun. Sound like fun? Guess how the casualties were for Russia? Yeah, huge. I mean, in the millions that they are having died. So the people are saying enough is enough, and they got out of the war. They just basically worked out with a deal with Germany. We're done. And Germany was fine with it because now they're not have to worry about fighting two fronts. That now is one.
Did Russia have a large population?
Yeah, they have a large population too. So, all right. Notice one little key thing. Anybody remember what the IWW was? Yeah, the labor union, the International Workers of the World. Our big Bill Hayward was our labor leader here in America. I told you this, for a short time, it was a very powerful union here in America. The Russian branch of that was part of that overthrow and part of making Russia Communist Soviet Union. So after the war, are we going to be in very much favor of the IWW?
No.
All right, no, and that's where I said it for a short time was very powerful, but it died very quickly. And that'll be our end to know we'll do the next part today, tomorrow.
Awesome.
The reason for joining in along with the side of Russia was the fact that Russia was no longer controlled by a monarchy or their czar. Now, here's where some of the terms you need to know militarily. Those of you that like military history, well, an AP is not the best class for you then. I have to keep things pretty similar or pretty low down on the military side. But the basic concepts that we have the Eastern Front and the Western Front. Remember where Germany, the whole idea of alliances, the reason why Russia and France had an alliance if Germany was to ever attack them, was that Germany had to fight a two-front war. The Eastern Front is in the border of East Germany and Russia. The Western Front was on the border of West Germany and France, Belgium, that area. Now, Germany in the first 2 years had to fight on both sides. Now, the video that you saw, those people running back and across the field, the way that Russia was able to basically counteract the fact that they did not have the technology that Germany had was just send more people. Okay, they can only shoot so many people with their machine guns. So instead of sending 2,000 people running across the field, let's send 20,000 people running across the field. And how do you think Russia did when it came to casualties in World War I?
Didn't care.
Okay.
Yeah, extremely high. All right, I mean, we're talking in the millions that they are having early on in the war, which is one reason why their people were when it overthrew Tsar Nicholas II, because so many of their people were dying.
What was the population before they started the war?
I don't know offhand what their population was. They are a large population country, but they sustained the heaviest casualties by far. And that's why when we look for the United States, and when that part with the barroom fight type I did, they say kind of the United States, we jumped in at the end when Germany's staggering, we hit them over the head with a bar stool and act like we won the fight. Okay, well, that's kind of what we did. We jumped into the war at the end. And it wasn't that kind of minimizes a little bit, but compared to what Russia did, we were not nearly as involved. We were the difference maker, though. Because what ultimately happens was its Eastern and Western fronts. And here, when the United States came in, we came to the Western Front. And when we went to that Western Front, what happened was Germany no longer had soldiers to replace where they're running across the field. They didn't have it. Meanwhile, for France and Britain, they were out of people, but here comes the Americans. So those Yankees are coming. All right, and they keep coming and they keep coming, and that's where Germany kind of realized, all right, where they had run out of people there. They could have kept fighting for a while longer when they did. They didn't. All right, the terms that you do need to know. Our military at that time was called the American Expeditionary Force. Okay, I know that you don't normally think of things with that. It's not the U.S. Army. It was a combination of things. One thing that ticked off Europe was the fact that we demanded that we have some independence over it. And it's one thing that a lot of times we have in military conflicts of things. When you do a joint action, do we allow other countries to have command of our soldiers? And in World War I, we said not at all. Okay, we will work with you, but that command, you can ask us to be a part of it, and that we did. We worked with the British and the French there, but General Pershing will be the man that is actually going to tell our military what to do. And the combination of the Army, what was called the Army Air Corps at that time, which wasn't much when we get to airplanes in World War I, that they really, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but it wasn't really as important. But Blackjack John Pershing was general. Same guy that had been chasing around Pancho Villa. All right, he is now the one in charge of it. And when we look militarily, sometimes we had the right man in the right job because he was good enough to kind of work with the British and the French and Belgians there. At the same time, keep that American independence, where we're not saying, oh, well, we're only going to jump in when we want to. Okay, because he was able, because part of it is when you have a war like that is not so much are you a great general, but are you a good politician? And both World War I and World War II, we kind of had the right person. World War II will have Dwight Eisenhower come in and do that. Now, 2 terms you need to know: trench warfare. That's where when you saw those pictures of all those things looking like ditches and everything going through. And if you were soldiers in there, you would be living in that. You might spend days at a time in that trench, which that's why they dug out things, which is when the artillery fire was coming, you would go and try to get in where you dug those little tunnels inside there to get out of it. Then the general would decide, charge. We're going to run across what is no man's land. In between the trenches on one side or another. Sometimes they were as close together as a quarter mile, a half mile apart. Sometimes it might be a couple of miles. But you might have the Allies on one side, the Central Powers on the other, and then the general decides, let's run across today. So everybody, get your gun, put your bayonet on, and you run across. We're going to try to surprise them. And you might get there, and you might actually get in and take over some of their trenches.
Or you might not.
Or you might not. Of course, what ends up happening is, if you don't get it, those of you that are alive, then you retreat, you get back to your own trenches, you come back there, and we find out that, we lost 10 of you. But guess what they decide to do, because they know we just lost a whole bunch of people.
They said charge.
Yeah, they decide to charge. Now you're the one sitting in the hole, shooting at them. You have the machine guns as they're running across an open field. And guess what the generals decide to do tomorrow?
Same thing.
Yeah, same thing. Because over time, you get more and more people coming to replace those that are killed. And what would end up happening is there were times that they fought for months in what would be the no man's land in between the 2 different armies might not change more than a mile or 2. As they basically dug and redug and just went back and forth in these areas.
Are they trying to run across the field to gain more land, or to...
Well, the idea was you're going to go ahead and crush that other army. But it wasn't happening because you had basically two forces that just kept pounding each other. And the idea was we're going to wear it out. Realistically, you think back to the Civil War, and this is how all these countries for the next several decades studied. How did Ulysses S. Grant ultimately defeat Robert E. Lee? Wait, that was a couple months ago.
More people.
Yeah, more people. Just kept on until basically wore down the Confederate Army and they could never win. How did Robert E. Lee defend himself?
He ran away.
invading them?
He had problems when he invaded. Antietam, Gettysburg. Robert E. Lee's 2 losses were when he invaded. He won when he was defending himself. Robert E. Lee was the one that perfected trench warfare. So we're talking 50 years later, half a century later, they are going at what methods did Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant fight in the Civil War. The only difference is we have a lot better weapons with doing this. All right, anyone, I know this isn't the easiest picture to see, but anybody know what this is?
Green.
No, it's not gangrene in this case.
Half-lit.
Athlete's foot.
Oh,
Trench foot.
Yes, say it again.
Trench foot.
Trench foot.
Ew.
Have you ever been doing something where, I would have sometimes where when I was playing football or something and you get out and it is like a rainy day. But you play a game and you know how when your feet are in socks that get wet and then you're in it for a couple of hours?
At Disney.
Well, what if you were, Disney, okay, those of you that were at Disney the other day. What if you are, for a couple of weeks, you're basically living in this ditch? That mud that you're walking through. Okay? Your time that you get out of that ditch is when you get to run across the open field in no man's land. Yay.
Yeah, that sucks.
So, you don't. And this is something that actually soldiers have all the time. When we get to the great historical film, Forrest Gump. All right, anyone remember that has seen that movie? What Lieutenant
Pack a lot of
Dan
dry
Taylor
socks.
what his standing order was.
Pack a lot of socks.
Yeah, keep dry socks. And that is one thing that actually in the military you kind of look at. You want to keep your feet dry. Right? One bad thing that'll happen is, which isn't as bad as trench foot, is athlete's foot. Okay, if it's always moist, you're going to have funguses growing there. That's a whole lot worse than that when you have things that are growing. And basically, your feet are almost rotting on you. Again, that's just part of the nastiness you have. All right, mechanized warfare. That is part of what you kind of look at. We have tanks. Notice the tanks are like what you're used to today. These first tanks, which a tank is basically you are in a metal box. They would put a machine gun. Now the tanks in World War I did not have very big cannons. Those huge cannons that you saw in the video, those aren't on a tank there. But you would have smaller cannons. But could you get up in closer to where people are and be shooting them with machine guns from there? So that's where you have that warfare. Machine guns are something that hopefully you know what it is. Barbed wire, I know that's not mechanized, but this is where the metal comes in and you're running across the field and you have it. All right, what are mines?
They blow things up on you.
Underground grenades.
Yeah, so we didn't really see those, but as you are running across no man's land, the night before, the other army went out and buried some bombs. Or you might, as you're running across there, might run across some of the mines that you and your fellow soldiers buried also. Because you're not exactly sure where they are, and maybe you buried them a couple days ago, and you've changed trenches a little bit during that time. So not only are you maybe getting stuck in the barbed wire, you're stepping on mines as people are shooting at you. Poisonous gases, and this is where Matthew had mentioned that about mustard gas. That was the most famous. Why is it called mustard gas? Well, it was yellowish color also in there. You could see that gas. There were other gases, but that was the most famous one thing. And as you breathe it, it may not kill you, but it's going to make you really, really sick.
Burn your lungs.
But it's pretty nasty. Flamethrowers. One of the most, you think about where people think about going to hell. Okay, the whole idea of burning to death. And think about it, if you've ever even burned a small part of your body and how painful it is. But if you have it where your entire body is on fire. And the rules of war today, I usually say the rules of war, and we basically have outlawed flamethrowers. But if you are, and one of the reasons why you have flamethrowers is, as you are going through these trenches, as you get in there, you're trying to get it where you shoot this through. And basically it's chemicals that are going, it sticks to you and then burns.
Is that like napalm?
And it would be a lot of things like napalm. I'm not sure if napalm was one of the chemicals they used in World War I or not, but that's the idea that you would have. All right, airplanes. You see the old-fashioned biplanes. They are not, airplanes at that time were not ones for dropping bombs. Usually the bombs that you dropped at that time, you might be able to put one bomb on the back and have a lever, but it's almost cartoonish. But what you would end up doing if you were flying a plane high enough where they can't shoot, you'd almost like look over the side and drop a bomb. But you would starting to have dogfights. What are dogfights in warfare?
Two planes.
Yeah, two planes that are fighting and going. And you see on this one, they had the machine gun up top, and you would have that. But where the real importance of airplanes came in is, it's basically where what the cavalry used to do. Now you could move your troops around. You're dug in trenches. If you decided, hey, let's put a whole bunch of soldiers and try to come in from the east. As the airplanes are flying over, they know exactly where you're going. So you could not make really any sudden moves. So that's where it really changes it. And U-boats are our first underwater boats or the submarines. And so you have all those things mechanized. All right, for our American heroes, the people that you need to know. Where the Civil War, we had all these people that you need to know. World War I, there isn't much of that. You need to know the main general, which is who? Yeah, John Pershing. And now we have Alvin York. And it is one of the things for Alvin York to kind of know with him. He started out as a pacifist. What is a pacifist?
Someone who doesn't fight.
And they don't want to fight, they don't believe in fighting. He was, I believe, a Quaker. He later on decided to join, and this kind of goes with that whole idea of making the world safe for democracy. Because one of the reasons why he justified when he was drafted, or when he joined, I'm not sure if he was drafted or not, was the fact that he could fight for religion, and that way in other countries they would have religious freedom. It is kind of ironic that where he would win a Medal of Honor, and his story is what today we would kind of look at things, and it is what you would make a Hollywood movie about. Because one soldier that took down an entire unit of the Germans.
Rambo.
Right, it is a Rambo type movie situation, except for when he came back. I mean, he came back and he had, like, I think it was 20-something German prisoners. All right, so this one guy comes back to the American camp with all these German prisoners. And here we go, turn them over. No one really knew anything about it. It wasn't until they started interviewing all the Germans that they found out what he did. And he had I don't remember how many people that he killed with this. But there was one person here, all right, whether it be Rambo or those of you who saw the movie The Patriot, where he's killing all these different people. That was Alvin York when he ended up winning this. Very humble man. Again, very religious person, but he was, I mean, a true American hero in that way, and a true warrior.
He's a mean scrapper.
And what he did. So he's where I don't have a lot of. He's one person that kind of put in where I try to make sure you have somebody in there to know. And we would have the movies made about him later on.
What did he do? How did he manage?
I don't even remember the whole story
He
offhand.
just went hard in the paint.
And what he ended up, I mean, he was in a situation, part of it was, and you see there, part of it is he even pulled out a pistol and was firing it. A couple of years ago, some people still weren't believing what was happening, and then they found the area that he was fighting in. They took metal detectors, and when they dug down, they found the cartridges of what would be the American gun that he was using, and then they found where the Germans were. And where the German stories, it actually, where they found the bullets and everything for the different weapons, everything fits still with the story that they were saying. And we're talking 90 years later when they went back and to see, okay, is there any evidence of where he was fighting? All right, could this be all the stories of it? Again, kind of like in the movie The Patriot about the ghost. Okay, but that's where it happened. All right, armistice. An armistice is a ceasefire. For a long time, November 11th was Armistice Day. What do we celebrate on November 11th today?
Labor Day? No, Veterans Day.
All right, Veterans Day.
Yeah.
There. Which what we ended up doing is that later on, not just for World War I veterans, we would celebrate all veterans then on November 11th. But on 11/11, they decided to stop fighting. It was decided before that time then that they would stop fighting on that day, the treaty, and the war's over. Now, they were going to negotiate the treaty after that, but that is where on November 11th, 1919. Now, if you remember, let's go back to your bracketing dates for the very first year. What year did World War I start?
1914.
Yeah, 1914. And what election did Woodrow Wilson say? Use the slogan, he kept us out of war. 1916. So they're fighting for 2 years before we have the election. So we're not in the first 2 years of the fighting. When did we declare war?
Right after he got elected.
1917. Okay, that next year. But we really didn't get a whole lot of soldiers in 1917. Because even though we were preparing for the war, we weren't preparing for the war a whole lot, and it took a while for us to mobilize. So realistically, we don't get really involved in the fighting until 1918. So we got involved in the last year of the war, is when we truly got involved in it. So that's where we came in at the tail end of the fight. And I think page 4 that I have on here, not really having, you don't really have to know battles, but those of you that for battles to remember, the Marne River and the Argonne Forest are the two biggest battles the Americans were involved in. And World War I is more of a European affair. It will make a bigger difference for us for the future. And what would happen. Us militarily, all right, it's not as importance militarily, it would be the effect afterwards. Okay, but the fighting would stop. And I'm going to go ahead and stop right there. It's most exciting, but this is where we end up having a lot of the impact. The war at home. When you see selective service, what word should you think?
Draft.
Yeah, think draft. We had a draft. We actually started drafting before we went into the war, but we ended up having a lot of people that were drafted to fight in this. Now, what is a conscientious objector?
Somebody who doesn't want to be drafted.
Someone
Well,
who
not
knows
just
the
drafted.
consequences and still does
Who
it.
doesn't, like based on their religion or whatever, can't fight.
Right, they have some sort of religious reason that they say they cannot fight. A lot of times what we'll end up doing, if there's a conscientious objector, they will have them in the military, but they may put them in a position where they won't be in a combat position. You have to realize that, like in the U.S. Army today, for every soldier that is basically in true military conflict and right in the front lines, there are 9 soldiers and support behind that. The Marines do not have near as much for their support staff, but for the Army, it's a huge support staff. That doesn't mean if you're in support staff that you'll never have any conflict, because you're just not on the front lines. The front lines could bust. You could have something that can come to you. In today's terms, you might have it where you have a attack that comes in from outside there. But conscientious objectors, and this is one of the wars that we have this come about. World War II would have some. The Vietnam War is when this will really come up. Then we have. All right, start noticing we have a lot of these different posters. You're going to see these propaganda posters that the U.S. Government was making. There, a lot of people volunteer, but a lot of people don't like the fact of going to war, and so we ended up having to do a draft. During the war, we passed the Espionage and Sedition Act. Now, what does espionage mean?
Spying.
Yeah, spying. Now, what is sedition? Remember a long time ago we had the Alien and Sedition Act? No? Alright, so, and basically you're saying, with sedition, you're saying something bad about the government. So, are you allowed to say something bad about the government?
Yes.
Yes. Can you in a war? And that's where we kind of have any questions. This law basically said, no, you can't. So, on the surface, this is where this law, you look at things. Well, we declared war, so during this war, you cannot spy against your country. Makes sense. And you cannot criticize your country. One thing that's hard for a lot of people, because during my lifetime, so definitely during your lifetime, we have not been in a declared war. And the last declared war the United States was in was World War II. So there's a lot of things where we had for the event of the day, and we had about Hanoi. Anyone know who Hanoi Jane was in the Vietnam War? It's a lady by the name of Jane Fonda, who she opposed the war. During the Vietnam conflict, she had blood drives in the United States for the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, the people that were shooting our soldiers. Was she allowed to do that in the United States? Yeah, she was. Now, in World War II, if she would have had a blood drive for the Japanese or German soldiers, guess what would have happened to her? Yeah, she could have been put to death, because that would have been treason against the country. But we were not in a declared war at Vietnam, we were in World War II. When a war comes, and this is one of the things that you have to realize as American, you lose your rights in a war. The Bill of Rights, you lose those during a war, because your purpose as a country is to win the war. Now, what we've had in recent years is, not too long after 9/11, the U.S. Congress declared war on, guess what? Terrorism. Is terrorism going to surrender anytime soon?
No.
And this is where we kind of have yes, they did it symbolically, but what does that mean for taking away your rights when it comes? And that's what the Supreme Court, we've actually had cases trying to say, all right, what can we do, what can't we do when it comes for terrorism? But getting back to World War I, this law that basically said you cannot even say bad things about your country during the war. Okay, that's the sedition part. When we had the Alien and Sedition Acts in the past, the alien part was to try to basically make it where immigrants couldn't become part a citizen for a later age. The other part, the Sedition Act, was the newspapers weren't allowed to write bad things about the government. Or as some of you remember, except for the vice president, who was Jefferson at that time. Where this will come in and here is where we'll have later on what is called the Red Scare. But there's also a Supreme Court case that upheld it, and the doctrine that is used. Now this is not one of our top 10 cases, but some of you legally, and this is where for a lot of you this is a case that's kind of a good one to remember. You may not remember this case, but clear and present danger. No, not Harrison Ford's movie, but this doctrine. And what is said with it, to make it real simple, is that if there is some sort of danger for what you are saying and putting things out, the government can stop you. They can take away your freedom of speech because you might be endangering soldiers. You may be endangering someone in the country. The question that we had then after that is, what about when we're not at war? What can be done and what can't be done when it comes to the freedoms of the speech? And here's a picture kind of showing there with a political cartoon. You see the piece of tape over the person's mouth where you can't. Uncle Sam kind of getting the agitators. Now, the reason why this is going to come in, we're going to have the Red Scare after this. We're no longer at war, but can we use some of these powers for groups of people that we want to put down? All right, and that's where what would grow out of this. That's what the Red Scare. That's what would grow out of it. All right, one of the most complicated things about the World War I foreign war at home is the war boards. I don't go nearly as in detail as I maybe should when it comes to the war boards, because what I have found in the past is a lot of people start getting confused with it. So I select just a few of the top ones. When we get to World War II, you're going to see a lot more with these boards. But whenever you see anything about the war boards, this is where you have a government program that basically is coming in and telling someone or some business what they are to do. Can the U.S. government come and tell me on my business what I have to make?
No.
All right, no, they can't. What if we're in a declared war? And this is where the war boards will come in, and World War I we would have this. The first one was the War Industries Board. So this is where, again, I'm not going through every single one. Key word to remember here is industries. So these are the things making things. And what ended up happening is they came in and they said, all right, we have steel, we have these things. We're going to make sure that we're focused on winning the war first. Before we have all the steel going to Henry Ford for his plans for making cars, we're going to have it for using to make tanks, or we're going to make cannons. All right, the priority is the war first. Now, did Henry Ford make money during World War I?
Yes.
Yeah, because when he maybe didn't make as many cars, but he was making trucks for the Army, he got paid by the U.S. All right, they make a lot. The only difference is he couldn't make things for consumers. The government comes first. And this is where in my lifetime we've never seen it, so you definitely have never seen it. All right? You think about it, we've been, your whole life pretty much, or I mean the majority of your life that you can remember, we have been at war. Well, this is our 11th year in Afghanistan. And what sacrifices have you all had to give up for this war in Afghanistan? I mean, unless you have a family member in there, you probably don't think about it. Unless you see something every now and then on the news, so for 5 seconds you think about it and then, oh, you change the channel or it goes to commercial or something else. Where World War I, and we'll really see it in World War II, it really does affect everything that you have. On our show and tells, the ration stamps that we have for World War II, and even to go to buy something at that time. And I know I'm kind of jumping around with this. World War I is kind of a good way of showing here's some of these programs. The War Industry Board, what they did in World War I, we're going to see it magnified many times over in World War II. In many ways, World War I was kind of our, here's how we do things. Then in World War II, we would correct those mistakes. The Food Administration Board, anybody have a guess of what they were in charge of?
Food.
Yes, food. This is a tough thing, isn't it? Now, anybody recognize that name?
Herbert Hoover. Wasn't he a president?
He will later on become president. And this is where he became really famous. He served several positions in government, but during the war, This is where he really comes about. Now, not only for food in the United States, but for our allies. Where that trench warfare was, it wasn't a real good place for growing food. Now, those machine guns just don't help. All right, crops grow real good. People trampling back and forth across the fields don't help. So this is where part of what we were doing is to have for the food for our allies. You see here with some of the propaganda posters. Food is ammunition. Okay, food. Buy it with thought. Cook it with care. Use less wheat and meat. Buy local foods. Serve just enough. Use what is left. Don't waste it. And that was part of the idea that you have on things because our priority is the war. Again, for you all, you all probably when you go to eat, you don't think, oh, I need to eat a little bit less this week because we need more for our soldiers in Afghanistan. Okay? But at that time, this is where, I mean, that's part of the ideas that you have. All right, the third one of this war boards is the Committee on Public Information. I believe we had George Creel as for our people report. Actually, we had Bernard Barish for the war boards. And here, but George Creel. The main word to remember with, sometimes you'll see it as CPI, Committee on Public Information, is propaganda. What is propaganda?
Send ammunition and such.
It's like telling
It's
people
like a
about stuff.
one-sided thing.
Okay, and that's where media strategy, it's one-sided. Okay, it's where, which for us, it's the government trying to get the media to go and report things that way. Part of what you do is these posters, and that's what they're most famous for, is these posters in here. Remember that making the world safe for democracy, reason why we're fighting? Wake up America, civilization cause, every man, woman, and child. Okay, and this is where even for trying to get people to join, gee, I wish I were a man, I would join the Navy. Okay, so you have propaganda, and you see these posters. You've seen the poster of the Uncle Sam with him, I want you for the U.S. Army there. All right, economic. Well, first of all, here's with some other posters. All right, beat back the Hun. All right, the Huns would be the Germans, and here with Liberty bonds. Now, when you see the word bond, what word should you think of? No, not James Bond.
Money.
Money. But one other thing, it's loan. A bond is a loan, and this is where, like what I was saying, like for antitrust, if you always put monopoly for trust, okay, it kind of tells you this. So, Liberty loans. Who are we giving loans to?
The government.
Yeah, the U.S. government. And what are they going to use that money for?
War.
The war. So that's where Liberty bonds come from. USA bonds. And now, Liberty bonds, loans to finance the war. During the war, they also raised taxes. I mean, war costs a lot of money. One thing that's going to help our U.S. government right now is, as we have ended the Iraq war and we are hopefully coming into an end of the Afghan war, that's a lot less money that we are spending in other parts of the world. I mean, war is expensive. And you have to pay for it. We've been paying for it by getting loans here in the last 10 years and paying for a lot of other stuff. That's why our national debt is so high. But don't worry, the workers of tomorrow will pay for it. Oh, wait. Y'all should worry. Yeah, Trace.
So, if we hadn't declared war since World War II, what was the Vietnam considered?
Well, we ended up still having to pay for it.
No, like, you said like...
Oh, we just call it conflicts or something. We give it, what is it? Our latest one that we had, President Obama, we've called them different things. When we went and helped out with Libya, it was a kinetic action. Okay, that's what the official term was for it. But did we have to spend money in Libya on taking our drones and planes and airstrikes? So, but it was a kinetic action. We did warlike things, but you can't call it a war unless you declare war. So all it is semantics. Okay, when we fought the Barbary pirates, it wasn't a declared war, but we were fighting them. Yeah.
If China's like not that far behind us and they're trying to catch up, why do they give us money?
Well, part of it, and this is where we'll actually hold that. Because we'll get to what in history how that fits in. Okay. All right. What would happen with the government during the war? This is a overriding theme in war after war after war. What happens to government there? They gain power. And whether it be a person, a business, a government, or a group of people, once you gain power, do you like to give it up? And that usually doesn't happen. We see it in the Civil War, where the U.S. government becomes very powerful, and Abraham Lincoln is the most powerful president that we ever had. All right, it'll happen again in World War I. Happens dramatically in World War II. Has the government gained more power in our war on terror?
Yeah.
Yeah, they have. I mean, and it's kind of ironic because one of our presidents who campaigned on making a smaller government ended up creating one of the biggest bureaucracies that we had in Homeland Security, okay, with President Bush. Okay, and that actually, Homeland Security gave the government more power. Now, and it comes back to all the way back, and you remember we watched 1776, that Ben Franklin had kind of said, how much do you give up of your security, or how much freedom do you give up because of security? Are we safer with Homeland Security and all the things that they do?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does make us safer. Did we give up freedoms to be safer?
Yeah.
Yes. And that's where we come to that balancing act. How much do you give up? There. We could be extremely free, but there would be a lot more things that could happen to us. We could be extremely safe, but we give up all kinds of freedom. All right, walk around everywhere with metal detectors and everything else like that. So, your generation has seen the highest security ever. I mean, you all don't think anything about security cameras. What would have happened if there would have been security cameras like around our school? You all don't even think about it, do you? All right, I mean, it's amazing what stupid things people do in front of the cameras. What do you think would have happened back in the 60s and early 70s if there would have been security cameras at a high school? All right, well, these are the same people that were protesting the Vietnam War. Okay, would they have felt, I mean, Big Brother was watching them, and you all don't think. So, I mean, so, and that's where you kind of look at things. This is where you have grown up. Now, it is for your safety. All right, and that actually started not because of terrorism, but because of Columbine and other school things that happened in the late 90s. All right, although it was thought to be at first negative, the war was good for the U.S. economy. It was really good. How many of the battles were fought in North America on our soil?
None.
Yeah, none. Meanwhile, are we selling more stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So factories are producing more. Remember the whole thing with the Food Administration Board? The farms are producing more. And what ended up happening for things, as the farmers are able to sell crops at higher prices to Europe, they're able to modernize. And if we look at the late 19-teens, there's still a lot of farmers that are still using horses and mules with plows. Well, if they're getting more money for their food, are they going to go and invest in tractors? And this is where the government would look and say, yeah, we need more tractors because that'll help produce more food. So a lot of our farmers basically that didn't have a chance to modernize, they modernized real fast on things. And here, Taylor, is where I come to the thing that it goes. Europe is buying food from us. They're buying weapons from us. They're actually getting loans from us, which they have to pay back. And the gold in Europe flows into the United States. And in World War II, guess what happens even more so?
Gold.
The gold flows into the United States. And this is where we held the gold. Now, if you are China today, they are one of the main people holding our loans. Although Americans hold more of those saving bonds. Some of you are having a national debt. If you have a savings bond, that's part of national debt. But as China buys a higher and higher percentage of our national debt in treasury bonds, we repay it in gold. Where's the gold flowing this century?
To China.
To China. So are they kind of looking to go and do what the United States did in the 1900s to do in this century? Now, this could also quickly be reversed. And one of the ways that actually, to take a positive spin on it, and maybe I'm more positive on this than others, one of the things that's happening right now is our oil production and what we have in our economy, we are actually Mitt Romney was saying this in the campaign, but this is where we actually, in the last 4 years, now produce a higher percentage of our own oil and energy than we have since any time since the 1970s, and are going to continue to go up and up there. Which means that instead of us sending our gold where we were sending it to Saudi Arabia, now more gold will come into the United States there, because we're actually exporting a lot of oil products. That was something that 10 years ago we thought we wouldn't be saying anytime soon. So you kind of look at that, yes, we have a national debt, but there are a lot of things that can be really positive for the United States, and really where sometimes when you see on the news, it's nothing but negative, 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 but we do have something there that looks like we can do to be independent. All right, social impact, Great Migration. What group of people moved to northern cities or continue to grow up to move? All right, blacks, African Americans. It had started before that time, but when those factories had to produce a lot of things for the war, it ended up producing even more of them moved to it. But is our military, as we're making the world safe for democracy, we still have a segregated military. Are we really as free as we say? And this is one of the things that you kind of look at and see for the United States, and other countries could look at us and say, huh, really? Backlash on immigrants. Why is it that you didn't like your German neighbor? Or your Italian neighbor if you're living in Chicago or New York or some city?
Is that putting you over more?
Well, yeah. What if your brother is off fighting and he's fighting the Germans, and meanwhile the people in the house right down the street, when they're talking to each other, they're speaking in German? Now, their family, they are Americans. They came here. They might even be a second generation. But there's sometimes where you maybe don't trust them. And so that's why we have a backlash against these groups as we're fighting. We need more workers. Who do we have willing to work? Yeah, Mexicans. So come here, come work, especially in the agriculture. We need them to come work in the agriculture. So we're inviting these Mexicans. Come on, come to America. It's great. Of course, what happened after the war?
Go away.
Yeah, we don't need you anymore. Go away. And then especially when we'd have the Great Depression happen. Then we really would be against them. An overriding theme that you're going to see, but again, not as much in World War I, but we'll see it in a huge amount in World War II, more jobs for women. If women are able to work, make their own paycheck, be more independent, after the war, are they wanting to still be that way a little more? You make it, Haley? All right, and here you see them with the propaganda posters. All right, more airplanes are needed. Women come and help. So they're trying to get women to come and work and things. One little side thing, the unions were gaining strength because they could not afford for someone to have a strike. And this would also bring up a question of what would happen if they went on a strike during the middle of the war. All right, here we get to the last little section I'm going to do today here. We're put stars by this part because this is one section. It's not real exciting, but here's where we see, especially world history coming into American history. Near the end of the war, our president, President Wilson, wrote what he called the 14 points. And he listed 14 things of what the world needs to do when this war ends. No, you don't have to know all 14 of them, but some of the main things he had. Territorial questions, where they were fighting over different areas of land. Basically, he would have, one of the things he would have is what's called self-determination. Let some areas vote and see if they want to be independent or if they wanted to be a colony. In other words, that where we had that cause of imperialism, let's take away some of this imperialism. Freedom of the seas. Okay, the militarism, the subs that we have, you should be able to cross it. And this was actually a really big one that we forget about a lot of times. But one of the reasons why we were in this war was because of the Lusitania sinking. Secret treaties. Remember, one of the causes was all these alliances, and some of them were secret ones. Then you shouldn't. If you're going to be an alliance, it should be well known. When we play our game on Monday, you can have a secret treaty, but it won't do you any good. Because if you have a secret treaty and you advance into someone else's country, All right, then your soldiers don't know it, and your two armies are going to be fighting, even though you say you're friends. Now, you will be able to go and you'll be able to turn in a sheet of paper that tells that you are friends. Germany and France are friends. It probably won't happen in our game, but it is possible. This is going to be something that you're going to see in the 1920s. Let's reduce the size of our military. If we have smaller armies, are we less likely to fight? And it's really good on principle, except for what happens if all of you are representing different countries of the world, and you all sign a pact to make your armies and navies less. And 15 of you all live by that
That's
principle, and you make your armies and navies less.
Then a few of them don't.
Yeah, and the other 5, 6 of you don't. What happens then? Yeah, and then you have an unfair event. So, in principle, it sounds great, and especially when people sign a sheet of paper saying, yes, I will do this, but if you don't actually do it. And how do you enforce if they don't do it? Self-determination, this is where a lot of these areas, and this is why we're going to have some of the areas of these countries, like this is where Serbia, where they wanted to be completely independent of Austria-Hungary. Well, if we let them be their own nations. But here's the biggest one. What he called a General Association of Nations. It would become known as the League of Nations.
Which was a failure.
All right, it ended up being a failure. Which anyone know why the League of Nations was a failure?
Because nobody would listen.
Yeah, we never joined. Now, in your mindset to think of the League of Nations, the idea that Woodrow Wilson had was basically what the United Nations was, or would become later on. So, the League of Nations is our president's idea, yet we're the ones that basically killed it because we won't join it. At the end of the war, there was a treaty that was signed at Versailles. No, this is not a Treaty of Paris, because Versailles is right outside of Paris. So this is the treaty right outside of Paris. Okay, but it's not another Treaty of Paris. But Versailles is the treaty that most of the nations would sign. Wilson came to it because he wanted to put his 14 points in it. And some of his broad ideas were included in it, but a lot of them were also ignored. One thing that happened, remember in our bar fight thing, that at the end of it, they said that all the countries said it was Germany's fault, but who actually threw the first punch? Austria, yeah. Austria-Hungary threw the first punch. But it's Germany's fault. Why are they blaming Germany?
Because they backed up Austria.
They backed up Austria, but what else?
The most powerful.
All right, they're what?
The most powerful.
Yeah, they're the most powerful. And they made them pay reparations. What are reparations?
Fees.
To repair it.
Fees, penalties is a way to do it. So they have to pay for the things that went back. Now, reparations are something that really isn't that bad when it comes to war, except for should you make sure that you tell the country what the limits are on their reparations. You have to pay us $20 billion over the next so many years. The problem that we had, and we'll see this happen in the next decades, is Britain and France kept going back to Germany and said, oh yeah, you owe us more money. Oh yeah, you owe us more money now. And finally Germany, and it basically would turn Germany and make it where it wrecked their economy. And then we had this little guy named Hitler that comes to power in part because of that. Now, Article 10 of the Treaty of Versailles would establish the League of Nations. So, Article 10 would establish the League of Nations. So this is what Woodrow Wilson wanted. So he's there, he gets his treaty. Most of what he was wanting is in this treaty. He comes back to the United States. It's just a matter of having the Senate vote and approve it. I mean, it's our president's work. A couple of words you need to know. Irreconcilables. When they saw the treaty, they said, no way. All right, we are not going to sign this. We will not vote for this. Not at all. There is no way in the world we're going to vote for this. Now, these were Republicans. Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat. Yes, we have political infighting at that time. We're kind of going through history again, almost 100 years later, the different parties not negotiating with each other too much. But these are Republicans that said, in no way. It's kind of like right now where we have this battle over things for a physical cliff, where there's some Republicans that say, in no way at all will I vote for any tax increase whatsoever. Okay, and that's where that would be like our irreconcilables there. Then we have our reservations. Reservationists. They have reservations. They're like, I'm not so sure about this. The main leader that we have there is Mr. Kilpatrick. Or better known at that time than things, Henry Cabot Lodge. He is the main Republican against it. Now, Henry Cabot Lodge, he sort of doesn't like the idea of the League of Nations, but there's something that he hates even more than the idea of the League of Nations. He hates Woodrow Wilson. I mean, he truly hates Woodrow Wilson. Are there some Republicans today that won't vote for something if it has Obama's name attached to it?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what Henry Cabot Lodge was when it came to the League of Nations. This was the work of Woodrow Wilson. I don't like Woodrow Wilson. I'm going to make it sound like I'm not going to vote for it because I don't want us to be in this treaty. But if this goes down, it makes Woodrow Wilson look bad. So I'm going to make sure it goes down. And Woodrow Wilson was actually pretty stupid with this because he would fight these reservations. These were the people that he could negotiate. And right now, I mean, the next couple of weeks, we're going to see where Obama and Boehner are kind of negotiating with each other with things, what will end up happening here. In this case, Woodrow Wilson said, I'm not going to negotiate with you. It's either my way or the highway. And guess which way they ended up going? Yeah, the highway, as it was never approved. Thus, we were not the nation that signed onto the Treaty of Versailles. We had to go and make a separate treaty with Germany and all these other countries, separate from the Treaty of Versailles. Ultimately, then, we would be the one that doesn't join the League of Nations, and without us being part of it was a big reason for its failure. Yeah, Taylor?
It's not supposed to be revisions instead of revisions.
Probably. Yeah. All right, and that's the end for today. What happened to America with the Treaty of Versailles?
Shot down.
Yeah, we didn't join it, shot down. And the irreconcilables and reservation, one thing, remember, these are both Republicans. Okay, when you see this, they are Republicans. They are the ones that are against the Treaty of Versailles. We ended up making our own treaty. We never joined the League of Nations at that time. And that actually will play into when we get to the World War II and some of the things causing World War II. Now we get kind of a hodgepodge of things. The post-war and some of the effects of the war. Some things directly, some things not directly. 1918 was one of the worst flu epidemics in the history of the world. It was a lot worse in Europe than it was in the United States. And and we know today when we talk about a avian flu or bird flu, we know today because they have strands of this flu that they have kept, they tested that it actually was a bird flu. But what happened is, as these soldiers were from all over the world in these giant camps, the flu just spread. War ends, they all go home. And they took this and made it a worldwide epidemic. The United States was not hit nearly as hard as Europe because we actually are spread apart a little bit more. And where we are not as densely populated as they are in Europe. But we still had thousands of people that died with it. There were a lot of areas that when the war ended that it was, don't really go outside. Okay, I mean, this is where when people, if there's a flu epidemic going around, a lot of people say, well, just don't intermingle with anybody. And this would actually play into the post-war recession that we would have. Yeah.
How do somewhat healthy soldiers die from something as simple as the flu?
Well, and not many of the soldiers died. I mean, there were some that did, but if you already had some problems, and some of the soldiers, their diet wasn't real good. Again, that's where for our American soldiers, we were better off than some other places, especially some of the Eastern European countries that have been fighting in this. But part of it was when you come back, like most times, if you were to get the flu, all right, you'd be really sick. But most of you, it's not really something that they're worried about you dying from it. But what if you already had some sort of immune deficiency? What if you're an elderly person? So that's where you end up. I mean, you feel really bad with the flu for a while, but if you are a healthy person, you're going to withstand it. But what if at Christmas you give the flu to your grandmother or your great-grandmother? Okay, would it be the same with them to be able to fight it off? All right, post-war recession. I have on there that it was made a little bit worse by the flu epidemic because people weren't going out, they weren't buying as much. Every war, you usually have a little bit of a recession, an economic downturn. Why, after wars, do we usually have a short downturn?
Because we used to jobs being
Well, we had the jobs, but then what else?
People come on and jobs again.
Well, we do have that fact that soldiers that were in the army now no longer have jobs.
Spent all the money in the war.
Well, some is the money that's spent, but we actually end up having those loans now, that those bonds that people bought, they can cash it in and get money. But what are the factories tool to make?
Weapons.
Yeah, weapons. So you have to have a little bit of time to retool the factories. Instead of making bullets, making cartridges for lipstick instead. And instead of making tanks, all right, making cars that people can buy. So you usually have a short term as there is an adjustment. But usually not long after that short recession, history usually has it where you have a boom economically, which the 1920s was a boom. One thing else that we had when we had that recession, we had a lot of strikes and race riots. Later on, I'm going to come back to some of the race riots in 1919, like in Chicago. There was a riot that took place there. One of the most famous strikes that we have is the Boston police strike. Now, police normally are not allowed to go on strike. Why?
Right, force it if the police want.
Yeah, if the police are saying, I'm not going to work. So usually if you are emergency personnel, so it's kind of a tricky situation if you're in a union for police and you want to have not just pay rates, maybe safety or some other things, but you maybe can't truly strike. So what are you going to do? But at that time they did go on strike. The National Guard had to be called in to basically make sure that things in Boston stayed under control. But this is one of the most famous strikes because the police in Boston, in order to try to meet their budget, was cutting the wages of the time in here. Here's where old headline Boston Post, the police vote to strike tonight, walk out at 5:45 p.m. roll call.
Were there like a lot of robberies that night?
Well, and this is part, and it wasn't as bad as people thought, anticipated, but because some people are like, all right, look at another, and this is one thing, if you knew that you weren't going to be police, would maybe some of you do some things to make sure you're protecting your own stuff, and that's what happened. All right, the Red Scare. First of all, who are we scared of?
Communists.
Yeah, communist. And actually, you can include in this communist, socialist, anarchist, anyone different. But when you see red, think communism. Why after World War I were we so worried about it? Yeah, the Russian Revolution. Okay, that Red Revolution where Russia had become the Soviet Union, where Karl Marx had written the Communist Manifesto decades before. Well, now we have something that occurs. And so this is where we would end up trying to find, all right, do we have people that want to overthrow the government and make it where we're a communist government? Part of this is the Dillingham Report. Now, anybody remember what the Dillingham Report was? Yeah, basically it was written before World War I, and it said that immigrants were our problem for almost everything. Well, a lot of the people that they suspected to be communists were immigrants. We like people that are different. And when we're scared about something and someone's different, and the Dillingham Report makes it where people think. All right, I'll send some down.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, now remember from the People Report, Sacco and Vanzetti. I put them together. They're two people. All right, they were anarchists. What else?
They were Italian.
They're Italian, and they are immigrants, which basically those are 3 strikes against them. They're accused of crimes. A lot of people, when we look back, say that they probably didn't commit the crimes that they were accused of, but does it really matter? All right, and this is where we kind of get a hysteria going against them.
None of the immigrants were actually communists, though, right?
Some immigrants were, and this is where, and the reason why, this is why there was a higher percentage of it, of the communists that were immigrants that were not. So that's why, but that's where people sometimes will go and, all right, I mean, you think today, where some people will look at things and say, all right, I mean, what percentage of Muslims are terrorists? Very, very tiny percent. But is there a distrust of people that are Muslim faith just because some are terrorists? All right, you have extremists of that, and that's kind of the way it was for a lot of the immigrants. Okay, there was suspicion. If you had a person that spoke in an accent, all right, well, do they really like our style of life here in America? Are they going to try to make us communist? Yeah.
All the people that we like blame to be communist and we put away for being communist, do you think they ever could have done anything on?
In some ways, yes, because if you get enough people, and that's what happened in Russia, is as you got more and more people involved, the way we really end up truly combating communism is not so much that you put down people of the party there, is you make sure that you actually have to do some things that that divide between the rich and poor becomes smaller. Because as it gets wider and wider, and you get more and more people that feel like they just, no matter what, they can't win in that society. The cards are all against them, they're for the very rich. The bourgeois and proletariat is what the Communist Manifesto talks about in there. So as you get that separation between the workers and the owners of the factories, there. If you make it where people that are workers have a little better economics, are they as likely to want to overthrow? But if you get people where they have nothing to lose, then why not? All right, it can't get any worse for us. All right, the Palmer Raids is also, now we actually get into the 1920s here, but the Palmer Raids, the Attorney General, A. Mitchell Palmer, and the Attorney General, the way to kind of know with the government, there's like our top cop. All right, they are supposed to head up the laws for the United States and round up in here. And what he was, and I have the quote on there, where he was not only for anarchist, socialist, which would be communist in there, but from a quote from him, labor agitators. What are labor agitators?
Unions.
Yeah, unions. Basically, you have people in the unions, and that's what everyone's causing the problems. Some people will look and think and say that maybe we are repeating history again with some of the things that are backlash against unions today. Some of the people involved in unions are agitators. Some of them aren't. This is where they were classifying with that. Then we get to the 1920s. We will have, in the 1920 election, which for the progressive era will be the first election that women are able to vote in. Warren G. Harding is elected. His slogan is the return to normalcy. Created a new word for the English language. What does he mean by return to normalcy?
Back to free America.
Well, back to normal, back to America, but what is America?
No wars.
And this is where, and you kind of look at it, it's kind of, you look at a lot of things. I showed you the one clip that one time for the immigration of the Jon Stewart show, and talking about how one thing that America is, it's always changing. And then the group that's in charge now is afraid that the next group might have it. And this is where we're going to see some of these things take place in the 1920s. As we're having, when we have these large numbers of people from Russia, Greece, Italy, coming over to the United States. Well, what are those old immigrants? How are they going to react to these new immigrants there? And that's what someone said, well, we need to get back. And you're going to see, Taylor, where you said American, we're going to see about Americanism. All right, in the 1920s, and we not only have the Red Scare, but we will have the Black Scare too in the 1920s. The post-war recession would end in the 1920s and would be a boom for the business. 1920s was great, except for at the end, what happened then? Yeah, the stock market crash and the Great Depression. Election 1920, Harding wins again. Return to normalcy was his slogan. If you see that campaign map, we still notice the way our blue is Democrats, red is Republicans. Not the way that a map looks today, because where is the heart of the Democratic Party still? It is the South. Because the Republican Party was still seen as the party of Lincoln, the party of the North. And for Republicans, they did not have much power in the South. But you see, the West, Midwest, and the New England states were very Republican.
Okay, the Roaring Twenties, is that like economically good? Is that what that means?
Yes.
Was the stock market crash like because of the economics during that time, or is it just something that happened to happen?
It is where what we end up having is over speculation. We expand and expand. And there comes a point, think of a balloon, you can only expand so much. And so that's why 1929, we will have a stock market crash, then come down. So, and I have on here, would the 1920s really be normal? With some flapper girls. And this is where the 20s will be. And the 20s are really interesting because you really do have this clash between the old and the new with different ideas. I mean, just thinking of fashion. All right, you see flapper dresses here. As we were watching Far and Away, okay, and saw the scenes and what they saw was appropriate. Is there a little less fabric on these dresses than what they were wearing, and when they was telling them to pull her skirt down a little bit because she was showing some skin on her ankle? Okay, that's not counting the girls working in the social club. Okay, because those are the other women, but for a proper woman. So can you imagine that group, and then here's their daughters wearing these dresses? Okay, if you ever think that, like, if your parents for you girls say, oh, well, you're wearing not enough clothes, all right, for one thing, for your parents, if they were in the 1970s or 80s, okay, some of the mini skirts, especially in the 70s and late 60s, okay, most of you would be ashamed to wear something like that to school. You just let the freshmen wear those. But a lot of that class that was fashionable there. I mean, but that's where there was some major changes that you think of in generation. But it was a dramatic change for what they had at that time when you get to the 20s. So. All right, some more posters on here. Again, Liberty Loan, making the world safe for democracy. Buy more Liberty bonds. All right, mustard gas, smell the garlic. And there is spelled like that. Basically, to make sure you get your mask on. Save wheat, meat, fat, sugar. Serve the cause of freedom. Again, this propaganda that the Committee of Public Information is getting about. Stomp out the Kaiser. Who's the Kaiser?
Germany.
Yeah, that's Germany. Need a fighter. I can't really read all the part there. But basically that he and his family may have enough. And that'll be the end for that section.